This show doesn't just cover politics, it covers things that take place all over the world. Anywhere, this ivory tower can focus on, especially if it's of interest to me, since this wasn't originally a news show, it just kind of ended up being that way. It takes a certain precedent, especially on issues of war and peace. There, one of the issues that I was paying attention to has been Syria and the events that have been taking place in Syria, especially seeing as we're talking about big time politics. We're talking about Russia, Syria, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Britain, France, all of these countries, Israel, involved in this particular region of the globe, trying to assist or to stop what was a coup. Now, this culminated in a truce between Turkey and Russia in order to not bombard Idlib province, because Idlib province has been a haven, even by UN standards, of tens of thousands of terrorists. And the odd reality of this is even though we're supposed to be fighting terrorists, threw our bodies on the line with the Trump administration talking about a conflict if Syria or Russia tried to regain the territory that was taken by those terrorists. Well, this ended up being neither here nor there because there was a deal between Turkey and Russia and essentially created a buffer zone. Now, that buffer zone has been shattered, and it wasn't Russia's fault that shattered it. Russia has bombarded the area recently, I think it was a few days ago. It was shattered by the terrorists that released a chemical weapon, chlorine gas. Now, this wasn't necessarily mentioned in mainstream media. One of my subscribers, HB, turned me on to this. I am enamored that this wasn't mentioned in mainstream media, and I suspect it's because the terrorists released chlorine gas, and Russia warplanes responded, attacking the area that they believe suspected of releasing that chlorine gas, or at the very least responding to the chlorine gas being released. Hundreds of people have been treated for choking wounds, or for choking and inhalation issues. The terrorists. Now, this channel has made this argument that the terrorists had more to gain from releasing chemical weapons than the Syrian government ever had on releasing chemical weapons. But the mainstream media went with this idea that Syria was responsible, even though no evidence was presented to make sure or to nail down this idea that Syria was responsible. And not just that, we had illegal weapon strikes, illegal missile strikes, because of a chemical weapons attack that there's been no proof that was carried out by the Syrians themselves. More likely than not, this was carried out by the terrorists. And in this particular case, the terrorists have released chemical weapons. And Syria and Russia have responded with military force. The thing of the matter is, now, there's another aspect to this that may also have some level of competing narrative. And I'll read the story after going into this part. Beforehand, all of the impetus or all of the incentive to release chemical weapons was on the hands of the terrorists themselves. I mean, ultimately, Syria had liberated like 90% of the territory. Russia and Iran was helping them liberate this territory, meaning they had it in hand. And if this war, this civil war, this proxy war, continued in the way that it was going, the people who were assisting with the coup, us, and Western allies, Britain, France, our lapdogs, and Israel in this matter, would lose. A war of attrition, they just lose. The attack on Idlib was going to be massive, and they were going to outright lose, which is why all of the hysteria from the United States surrounding that particular attack, with Western forces trying to protect the terrorists in Idlib, even though they acknowledge that they are indeed terrorists. The other narrative to this, though, somewhat changes. Now, Syria, I would imagine, wants to get its territory back, and this buffer zone, let's be honest, this buffer zone prevents them from getting their territory back. Is there any incentive for Syria to create a pretext by which they can blow off the treaty and go in to take their land back? Maybe, but I'm less believing in that particular narrative. I'm more believing in the narrative that the terrorists themselves release the weapons, just like the terrorists had all the incentive in the world to release them prior. They're losing a campaign, and they need Western forces to assist them. And the only way they were going to be able to get Western forces in to assist them with any level of legitimacy, even though there wasn't going to have any legitimacy associated with it. It's this idea that, oh, we've gave them a red line of chemical weapons. Look here, we see chemical weapons. And because they're chemical weapons, by definition, the Syrian government had to have released them. Well, for whatever reason, mainstream media hasn't necessarily been all that enamored with this narrative of the terrorists themselves releasing the chemical weapons, just like it seems that they've done. Let's take a look at this. I know this is a grim way to start today, but I've been following this issue. So, insurgent shells wounded dozens of people in Syria, Aleppo, causing choking, state media said on Saturday, and a monitor said government shelling killed 9 people in a rebel-held Aleppo. Yes, they killed them in response to the chemical weapons that were released in Aleppo, Syria's capital. Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said the 2 women and 7 children were killed in Idlib province, where Russia and Turkey have agreed on a buffer zone. Again, the agreement was broken when insurgents shelled and wounded dozens of people in the Syrian capital. The UK-based observatory said that the shelling of Aleppo, which is under the government control, wounded at least 32 people, including 6 children, causing breathing difficulties. State news agency Sana cited a health official with militants hit 2 districts of Aleppo with shells containing gases that injured 50 people to choke. A witness outside of Al-Razi Hospital in Aleppo said the shelling caused dozens of injuries, including women and children. Now, let's go to this part. Russian warplanes strike Syrian rebels following alleged gas attack. That's more honest. Russian warplanes attacked rebel-held areas in northern Syria for the first time in weeks on Sunday, as Syrian officials said more than 100 people were treated at hospitals for what they alleged to be a gas attack by rebels in the northern city of Aleppo. Russian military spokesman Major General Igor Konechnikov told reporters in Moscow that Russian warplanes destroyed militant positions in northern Syria, blaming them for the attack on the gas on Aleppo. We have no idea if that's true. We just know that Russia attacked certain areas. Whether or not those areas were directly related to the gas attack, we have no idea. This is the fog of war. The latest wave of shelling and airstrikes in northern Syria is the most serious violation of the truce reached by Russia and Turkey that brought relative calm to the northern for 2 months. Well, again, it is not the latest wave of shelling and airstrikes is the most serious violation. Well, it's not the airstrikes that are a violation of the truce. It's the shelling that's a violation of the truce. The airstrikes were in response to the breaking of the truce by the shelling of the rebels. The rebels who we have supported by giving weapons and financing so they can take down the Syrian government. They failed in that, and they organized themselves in Idlib province. Now, you have tens of thousands of terrorists in Idlib. Certainly, there was going to be an issue, and there was no way this was going to be able to maintain. But, and here we are, 2 months out. The terrorists set off bombing in the capital of Syria. Russia responded with military force. The planes of Russia Aerospace Defense carried out strikes on detected artillery positions of the terrorists in the area where the shelling of the Aleppo civilians and chemical munitions was conducted late Saturday, Konechnikov said. The British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights and Atika news agency, an activist collective, said warplanes pounded rebel-held areas west and south of Aleppo, where the airstrikes were the first since the truce was conducted on the 17th. Sana said alleged chemical attack late Saturday was carried out by terrorist groups positioned in Aleppo countryside that shelled containing toxic gas in the neighborhood of Syria's largest city. According to preliminary data, particularly the symptoms shown by the victims, the shell's bombardment with the residents were filled with chlorine gas. At least that's what's suspected. Now, the reality of this is to some degree a fog of war. The suspected, or the main idea, or the main line of thought boils down to terrorists that were in Idlib sent off shells into Aleppo, or terrorists that were in Aleppo's countryside sent off shells that hit Aleppo city. In response, warplanes attacked terrorist installations. That's all we know. That's all we know. The other stuff about how many people were killed or injured or all this other stuff, it becomes somewhat coloring to the basic reality of what we believe is taking place. Again, there is a possibility that, no, I'm going to take that possibility off the table because it seems that both sides agree that the rebels fired off shells. Even the British base observatory has, at the very least, seems to agree on this particular basis of reality. So the contrasting narrative of that the terrorists would argue is, well, we didn't do this. We didn't do the chemical attack. This was purely the Syrian government because they want to recover the land that is held in the buffer zone. Is it possible? Yes, it's possible. It seems that all of the other installations that's talking about reality disagrees with that particular perspective and agree that rebels shelled the area and Russia and Syria responded in kind. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that's clear on what was taking place. Garnome, hello, Holly. Yes, hello, Holly, indeed. Assad has every intention to gas the enemy because victory and maintaining power over one's preferred way to survive is more important than subjective morality. That doesn't make sense, though, says Homerus 3est. That position makes no sense. Assad has every intention on surviving, but intention on surviving has nothing to do with morality. Morality has nothing to do with either the United States policy, Western policy, and in this case, Bashar al-Assad has nothing to do with morality. I've made no argument about morality. The argument has everything to do with survival. Bashar al-Assad has every intention on surviving. That means not using chemical weapons, because that would give a pretext for Western forces that wanted to attack that region of the globe. By the same token, this is no reason to do this, seeing as they own 90% of the territory and left to their own devices would outright destroy any opposition put up by the terrorists at this point. That position makes no sense. That's all I'm saying. Said it doesn't need chemical weapons to win, and using them on civilians does not further military objectives. Thank you, Garnome. We agree. He doesn't want the West involved. Spider, yes, agreed. This is about the new Syria, Ukraine. Oh, I haven't even gotten to Ukraine yet. Supporting Nazis in the Ukraine. But says me, what is morality if not surviving, improving, maintaining survival? But that's not morality. Morality has nothing to do with this conversation. Take it off the table, full stop. What has to do with this conversation is military survival. What do you believe? What are the objectives of the people that are involved in this conflict? Objective number one is survival. Assad has clung to that position with grim and vicious determination. Again, morality has nothing to do with this. From a military survival standpoint, he has every interest in not using chemical weapons, especially since his military objectives can be accomplished without them, and using them only weakens his position because it allows Western forces to get involved with a fig leaf of legitimacy on this. The goal in this is to keep Western forces out. You have the conflict in hand. Why would you need to do something that weakens your own military position, which chemical weapons does? The chemical weapons assaults that have been blamed on Bashar al-Assad, the last UN inspection showed that there were no chemical weapons being used in this case. So this argument makes no sense. That argument makes zero sense. All right, I'm going to end this because I have a few more videos that I want to do tonight, but I wanted to start on this one. Guys, if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like it, subscribe it. This video is going to get immediately demonetized. So if you would like to support the content, please consider supporting it. Many of the videos I do get demonetized, especially when talking about war or issues of sensitivities that it doesn't necessarily like. So please consider supporting the content. All right, I'm going to leave this. It doesn't weaken him. How does chemical attack on an enemy in different locations weaken him? Are you serious? The West has used this fig leaf of a chemical attack as pure justification for assaulting Bashar al-Assad. That has literally been the fig leaf that they've been using to conjure up some kind of reason to get in, meaning we need to assist with humanitarian reasons by bombing the shit out of his population and by killing him and throwing the country into chaos. That's been their fig leaf. Why on earth would he use chemical weapons when chemical weapons don't need to be used? That makes zero sense. People keep saying he's a bad guy, and because he's a bad guy, that's enough of a reason for him doing it. But that logic makes zero sense. It's probably cheaper to make chlorine-based weapons than to buy them, depending on the complexity. Yes, I am. What proof you have that the West did it? I didn't say the West did it. I said the rebels did it. The West is supporting the rebels, yes, but all right, I'm going to end this. I'm just saying this argument of morality and all this other stuff doesn't really make that much sense, at least from the standpoint of military objectives needing to be accomplished. I will leave this here. You guys can make your own mind up, but it seems like there's agreement that the shells were by the rebels, and these rebels were supported by the West. So I'll leave it here. Right, it's too far to say that the U.S. ordered it. Yeah, I never made that argument. My argument was that early on, the chemical weapon strikes either were faked or could not necessarily be full bore given to Assad, even though the mainstream media made this argument that Assad did it. We know that there were Turkish installations that were shipping weapons or allowing weapons to be transported that could be used for chemical weapons. We know this stuff. The New York Times have even ran stories saying that the rebels had access to chemical weapons. By the same token, this wasn't a convenient narrative for the West. And so mainstream media didn't necessarily go with this potential. They just went with Bashar al-Assad. When Mattis was asked, where's the evidence for this? He said, we don't have any evidence. The evidence is still being sought after. They use social media to make a determination on whether or not chemical weapons have been used. That's nonsense. The only person that would have, or the only group that would have had any incentive to use chemical weapons was the terrorists. That was my argument. Now, this was not the argument that I made for this particular video. This video was just the basic news report of, it seems like rebels released chemical weapons and that Russian warplanes responded in kind. I never said that the United States ordered it. I never said any of that stuff. This is stuff that's being made out of whole cloth. Russian chemists took samples of the used missiles. The United States is using chemical weapons in eastern Syria continuously. My argument is that the rebels are being attacked at different locations. Yes, because they're terrorists. I mean, you're calling them rebels, but they're terrorists. I mean, if there was a situation where you had a faction of militia that was roaming the countryside in the United States, I don't think you'd be taking this argument so casually that these guys are head choppers and rapists, and that you'd imagine that Syria would want their country back. If they are being attacked, they're being attacked because they are terrorists. Call them what they are. This trying to whitewash them as rebels is trying to make it sound much nicer than what it is. I mean, let's be honest. Let's be honest. All right. I'm going to end this because I'm just arguing with one person at this point. I'll leave it here. Shout out to HB for sending me the story. I hadn't heard anything about it, and Western media, for the most part, has gone silent on this issue. So, if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks all.